I bought 90 acres of overgrown timber and tired soil for exactly one reason: silence. The kind of heavy, beautiful silence that you can wrap around your shoulders like a warm blanket. The kind I hadn't felt in 20 years of wearing a badge, breaking up domestic disputes, and scraping tragedy off the asphalt of Mercer County. When I signed the deed to the old Blackwood Ranch, I wasn't just buying land. I was buying a tomb for the part of me that had seen too much. A place where the only thing I had to arrest was a rusted hinge on a barn door or a stubborn goat that didn't want to go inside for the night. I spent that first year sweating out the demons, rebuilding the porch that leaned like a drunk at last call, clearing out a pond that looked more like a science experiment than water, and learning to sleep without one hand reaching for a service weapon that wasn't there anymore. It was perfect, it was hard work, it was mine, and for a while, the world let me be. But peace, as I learned the hard way, is fragile, and it shatters easiest under the weight of entitlement. It started with a low rumble, not thunder, but the grinding gears of bulldozers tearing into the earth just beyond my eastern ridge, the sound of progress arriving to strangle the quiet. Within months, the rolling hills next to me were shaved bald, sterilized, and replanted with rows of identical, soulless beige boxes, a pop-up kingdom of suburban vanity called Sunnyvale Meadows. I didn't hate them for building houses. People need places to live, and I figured my deed, which was older than most of the people moving in there, would protect me from their nonsense. I was wrong, dead wrong, because bad neighbors don't just stay on their side of the fence, they infect everything they touch. The first sign that my retirement was under siege wasn't a lawsuit. It was a golf cart, a pristine, white electric buggy humming along my fence line like a sleek little predator. Two men sat inside, dressed in matching polo shirts that were too tight and khakis that had never seen a speck of dirt, taking notes, pointing at my tractor, pointing at my barn, looking at my life like it was a stain on their perfect view. I waved, just a friendly country wave, the kind that says, "I see you," and we're cool, but they didn't wave back. They just whispered to each other and sped off like they'd been caught peeping in a window. Then came the drones, angry little mechanical hornets buzzing 50 feet over my head, hovering over my porch while I drank my coffee, watching me, recording me. And then, the foot soldiers arrived. I was in my workshop one Tuesday, sharpening a blade, when I heard the crunch of boots on gravel, my gravel, on my land. I stepped out, wiping grease from my hands, and saw him. A guy dressed in full tactical cosplay, combat boots, a vest that said Sunnyvale Security in bold letters, a body cam, a radio, the whole SWAT team fantasy purchased on Amazon. He was filming my barn with a massive camera, zooming in on my tools like he was gathering evidence for a murder trial. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice low, the command voice I hadn't used since I handed him my badge. He jumped, startled, then puffed up his chest, trying to summon authority he didn't have. "Sir, I'm conducting a perimeter compliance check. Your agricultural equipment creates a visual nuisance and violates Sunnyvale aesthetic guidelines. We need to document this for the board." I almost laughed, almost. "You're trespassing," I said, stepping off the porch, "and your guidelines stop at that property line." "Actually," he stammered, his hand drifting to his radio like a nervous tick, "under the adjacent property oversight clause, we have the right to monitor potential hazards that impact property values, and I'm authorized to." "You're authorized to leave." I cut him off, taking one step closer, just one, letting him see the look in my eyes, the look that says the talking part of this interaction is rapidly coming to a close. "Before I call the actual police and have you arrested for criminal trespass." He scrambled back to his golf cart so fast he nearly tripped over his own tactical boots, muttering into his radio about a hostile subject, but he left. I thought that was the end of it, just some overzealous rent-a-cop trying to impress his boss. But then the boss showed up. 2 days later, a luxury SUV, black, polished to a mirror shine, rolled up my driveway, avoiding every pothole with surgical precision. Out stepped a woman who looked like she was carved out of ice and expensive lotion, wearing a blazer that cost more than my truck and holding a clipboard like a weapon. This was Patricia Vance, the HOA president, the queen bee of Sunnyvale Meadows, followed by another one of those tactical security clowns. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, not asking, just stating, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that barely covers the poison underneath. We have a problem. I don't have a problem, I said, leaning against a fence post. You have a vehicle parked on private property. She pulled a document from her clipboard, a crisp sheet of paper with an official-looking seal. This is a jurisdiction expansion order, she said, waving it in my face. Signed by the Sheriff's Department, granting Sunnyvale Meadows temporary oversight of bordering undeveloped lands to ensure safety standards. Your farm is a blight, Mr. Reynolds. Odors, noise, visual clutter. We're going to be issuing fines starting today, and if you don't comply, we will begin lien proceedings. I took the paper. I looked at the seal. It was the old county seal, the one they retired 5 years ago. I looked at the signature. It belonged to a sheriff who had been playing golf in Florida for the last decade. My blood ran cold, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute. This was a con. I pulled out my phone and dialed the current sheriff, my old friend Miller. Get out here, was all I said. When Miller arrived 10 minutes later, the color drained from Patricia's face, but she held her ground. Arrogance is a hell of a drug. Miller took one look at her forged document and laughed, a dry, humorless bark. Mrs. Vance, this is a forgery, he said, handing the paper back to her like it was dirty tissue. If you try to enforce this, I will throw you in a cell. This man's land is not your playground. Get off his property. She turned purple, then white, then a dangerous shade of red. This isn't over, she hissed, retreating to her SUV. We have standards. We have resources. You can't stop progress. As she drove away, Miller looked at me, his face grim. She's not going to stop, he warned. People like that, they don't hear no, they hear try harder. Watch your back, old friend. They're going to come for you, and next time, they won't be polite enough to knock. He was right. The silence I bought was gone, replaced by the feeling of being hunted in my own home. But what Patricia Vance didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that she wasn't hunting a prey animal. She was poking a sleeping bear. The escalation didn't happen with shouting matches or lawyers. It happened in the shadows, a campaign of psychological warfare designed to make me crack, sell, and leave. For a week, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. Then, the surveillance went from annoying to criminal. I was out by the pond one evening when I heard that familiar angry buzz, louder this time, erratic. A high-end drone, not a toy, was swooping low over my cattle, spooking them, diving and climbing like the pilot was either drunk or trying to cause a stampede. Suddenly, the drone jerked, clipped the top branch of an oak tree, and cartwheeled out of the sky, splashing heavily into the muddy water of my pond. I waded in, boots sucking in the muck, and fished it out. It was heavy, professional gear, blinking red lights through the algae. I took it inside, dried it off, and pulled the SD card. When I plugged it into my laptop, what I saw made my stomach drop through the floor. It wasn't just scenic shots of the neighborhood. It was me. Hours of footage. Me drinking coffee on my porch, me fixing the tractor, me changing my shirt in the backyard. They were building a dossier on my life. But the real horror was a PDF file sitting in the root folder, titled Phase 2 Expansion, Confidential. I clicked it open, and there it was. A blueprint of Sunnyvale Meadows, but bigger. And sitting right where my farm was, right where my house stood, were 25 new luxury lots, a community center, and a pool. They had already drawn up plans to bulldoze my life. My farm was just a pending acquisition on their map. They didn't want me to clean up my yard. They wanted to erase me. I checked the flight logs. Every single flight originated from the backyard of a massive house on the hill, a house belonging to Kyle Henderson, the 20-something fail-son of the powerful Judge Henderson. Patricia had recruited the local royalty to do her dirty work. That night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered, expecting a threat. Is this Mr. Reynolds? The voice was young, shaky, terrified. Who is this? My name is Leo. I work security for Sunnyvale. I need to tell you something. They're going to do something bad tonight. Please, meet me at the old bridge. I met him. Leo was a kid, maybe 22, wearing that ridiculous tactical vest over a hoodie, shivering in the cold night air. He spilled everything. He told me Patricia Vance was on the payroll of Apex Development, receiving kickbacks for every plot of land she could annex. He told me the fines were fake, the complaints were automated bots, but the terrifying part was the endgame. They're tired of waiting, Leo whispered, looking over his shoulder at the dark road. Patricia told us to create an environmental hazard. Me and another guy were supposed to go into your woods tonight, near the creek, and bury a drum of industrial waste. Chemicals. Then she calls the state EPA in the morning. They find the leak. You get hit with massive cleanup fines. The county condemns the land, and you're forced to sell for pennies on the dollar. You were going to poison my land? I asked, my voice deadly calm. I can't do it, Leo pleaded, tears in his eyes. I quit. But the other guys, they're still coming. Tonight, 2 a.m. I sent Leo home and went back to the farm. I didn't call Miller yet. If I called the cops now, Patricia would just deny it. The goons would get a slap on the wrist for trespassing, and the war would continue. No, I needed them to commit the act. I needed undeniable proof. I needed to catch them holding the shovel. At 1:30 a.m., I was lying prone in the underbrush near the creek, wrapped in camouflage, my old 12-gauge shotgun resting across a log. The woods were silent, save for the wind. Then, the snap of a twig. 2 beams of light cut through the darkness. 2 figures, dressed in black, struggling with a heavy, plastic 55-gallon drum. I watched through the scope of a thermal monocular I'd kept from my service days. They reached a soft patch of earth and started digging. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of my grave being dug by strangers. I let them get the hole waist deep. I let them roll the drum to the edge. I waited until the crime was undeniable. Then, I stood up and racked the shotgun. CHH. In the absolute silence of the woods, that sound is louder than a cannon. It is the universal language of "you screwed up." The 2 men froze, their flashlights shaking violently. I hit them with my own spotlight, blinding them. "Evening, gentlemen," I said, stepping into the clearing, the shotgun leveled but low. "You seem to be lost. And you seem to be carrying something that doesn't belong in my soil." "Oui," one of them stammered, dropping his shovel. "Run," I commanded. They hesitated. I said run. I roared, unleashing the command voice that used to quell prison riots. "Leave the drum. Leave the shovels. Tell Patricia I said hello." They bolted, crashing through the briars like frightened deer, leaving behind the evidence, the tools, and their dignity. I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. I had the drum. I had the drone data. I had Leo's testimony. And hidden in the trees above us, blinking silently, was my own trail camera, which had recorded every single second of their felony in high-definition night vision. The trap was sprung. They thought they were burying me, but they had just dug their own graves. The next morning, the sun rose over Blackwood Ranch with a brilliance that felt like a promise kept. I didn't call the local police. I went nuclear. I called the State Environmental Investigation Bureau. When their agents arrived, serious people and windbreakers who don't care about local politics or rich daddy judges, I handed them everything. The recovered drone SD card with the illegal surveillance, the Phase 2 blueprints, the testimony from Leo, and the trail cam footage of the attempted chemical dumping. They looked at the drum left by the creek, tested the soil, tested the contents, which were nasty enough to have destroyed my water table for a century, and their expressions shifted from professional curiosity to cold, bureaucratic rage. The lead agent looked at me and said, "Mr. Reynolds, stay here. We'll handle this." An hour later, a convoy of state vehicles and Miller's sheriff cruisers rolled into the pristine, manicured streets of Sunnyvale Meadows. I followed in my truck, just to watch. They pulled up to the clubhouse where Patricia Vance was holding court, likely bragging about how she'd finally dealt with the farm problem. She came out onto the steps, shouting, demanding to see badges, screaming about jurisdiction, playing the victim card she had perfected over a lifetime of getting her way. But when the state agents slapped the handcuffs on her wrists, the screaming stopped. It was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. She looked at Miller, then she looked past him and saw me, leaning against my truck, sipping coffee from a thermos. "You can't do this," she shrieked as they guided her into the back of a cruiser. "I am the president of the association. I am protecting this community. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism, fraud, and racketeering," the agent said, slamming the door. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. They picked up Kyle Henderson an hour later. The tough guy act evaporated the second he saw the drone footage linking him to the crime. He sang like a canary, implicating his father, the developer, and Patricia in a desperate bid to stay out of prison. The trial was less of a legal battle and more of a public execution of a corrupt system. The courtroom was packed. When the prosecution played the video of the men digging the hole to poison my land, the jury looked at Patricia with genuine disgust. The revelation that Apex Development had been paying her under the table to drive neighbors out so they could expand the subdivision destroyed her defense. The verdict came down like a hammer, guilty on all counts. Patricia Vance was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The HOA was dissolved by the state and placed under receivership. Kyle Henderson got community service and a permanent felony record that would ruin his daddy's reputation forever. Apex Development settled with me out of court for a sum that had so many zeros I had to count them twice. Enough to fix every fence on my property and buy a new tractor, with plenty left over to ensure I never had to worry about money again. 6 months later, the silence returned to Blackwood Ranch. The real silence. The construction stopped, the drones vanished, and the new neighbors, freed from the tyranny of Patricia, actually started waving back when I drove by. But as I sit here on my porch, watching the sun dip below the tree line, listening to the crickets start their evening choir, I can't help but think about how close it came. If I hadn't been a former sheriff, if I hadn't known how to gather evidence, if I hadn't had the guts to stand in the dark with a shotgun, I would have lost everything. And that's the terrifying part, isn't it? I won because I was trained for war. But what about the teacher, the mechanic, or the grandmother who lives next to a Patricia Vance? What happens to the people who follow the rules when the people in charge decide that the rules don't apply to them? Is justice something we are guaranteed, or is it just something we have to fight for, tooth and nail, in the dark of the woods? I'm Reynolds, and this is my land. And God help anyone who tries to take it again.